Good morning. It is good to be here this morning. Good to see you. It's great to be back in this pulpit. I about forgotten how to do it, and when I get done, you may say, "Yeah, he has." But I'll try, okay? I'm in Job chapter 3. I'd love for you to join me there in Job chapter 3. We've taken a sabbatical from this topic of suffering, from this theme of dealing with hardships and problems. The elders asked me to step out and to teach a few lessons on leadership in the church. And so we did that leading up to our homecoming. And then I knew I would be away last Sunday at family camp. And so had a couple of weeks gap here. And this morning we want to get back into our theme with the problems of, there's a lot of things that cause trouble, aren't there? I was just thinking about all the things in life that cause us to be pained or to have heartache, and I don't know how long the list is. I guess it's a mile long. I was thinking about things like broken relationships. They start as simple as boyfriend and girlfriend, and those things get broken, and man, it's just traumatic, and we think the world's ending, and then it can get into some more serious things like parents and child relationships, and they get broken and fragmented, and it's just very traumatic. I think about things like divorce, when marriages, relationships fall apart, and all of the trauma that causes, and the pain and the difficulty, and then if you have remarriages, and there's just a lot of difficulties that come in those times in life. I think about financial troubles. I think about debt, and I think about job loss, and I think about people that live above their incomes, and the difficulties and the trials and the trauma that those types of things cause, some of which are in our control and others of which may be out of our control, like health issues and the payments and the financial responsibilities that come along with that. Then I move to things like natural disasters, things that are completely out of our control, things like tornadoes or hurricanes or house fires, and the trauma that things like those types of events cause. And then I move into another category, the category of disease and terminal illnesses, things like cancer, things like Parkinson's, those terrible, awful dementia, diseases that our bodies become havocked with for different and variety of reasons, and sometimes we may not even know the answer. Then ultimately I think about death, and the separation and the stress and the trauma that death causes when a loved one dies in our life. Life is just full of trouble, isn't it? Job said that in Job 14 and verse 1. He said, "A man is born of woman and is a few days and full of trouble." I don't know of any more depressing passage in all of the pages of Scripture than Job chapter 3. And I got to be honest with you, I intended to get here sooner, but the schedule got adjusted, and I'm cool with that, because you know why? Because this lesson came on a bright, sunny summer morning. It would have come back there in the cold of winter, but now it's bright, because I just really don't know how it gets more depressing than Job chapter 3. As Wayne Jackson put it, and as I mentioned a couple of Wednesday nights ago, Job chapter 1 and 2 are a spiritual peak. And Job chapter 42 is a spiritual peak. And in between those two spiritual peaks are a valley of depression and questioning. It's a valley of doom and gloom. It's a valley of heartache and trials. It's a valley of unknowns and uncertainties. And it's into that valley that we plunge in Job chapter 3. When David Butler read the Bible reading a moment ago, it just describes, those first 5 verses just describe the heartache, describe the pain in graphic detail. When you think about the mind and the heart and the setting in which Job finds himself, I basically have one question this morning. How do you and I survive the darkest hours of life? I'm convinced this morning that Job it's dark. I'm convinced this morning that Job is filled with trouble. And I'm convinced this morning that Job is looking for rest that seems unattainable. He's in a very dark spot. How do you and I survive? It's not if, it's when. For those of you that have lived longer than I have, you know that it's not a matter of if these times are going to come in life. It's when they come, what are you going to do? Because among that little short list of things that I mentioned a while ago, perhaps all of us have been impacted recently, or we are being impacted currently by one or more than one of those things. And that is certainly not an all-inclusive list. It's just a few things to cause your mind to think about what it is that causes us to have the valleys of life. And so I want to look at 3 things in Job chapter 3 this morning. I want you to see the darkness. I want you to see the darkness. I want you to see that the darkness is real. Now, I'll be honest with you. Any type of darkness is always real for me. Man, I hate darkness. I'm scared of the dark. It's real. I mean, I am really frightful. But far too often, we go through life in dark periods, avoiding the fact that it's dark. We go through dark periods in life trying to create some facade that is just not real. We go through trials and troubles and we try to put on our big boy pants or big girl pants and try to make it. I'm all about optimism. I'm all about seeing the glass half full. I'm all about trying to find the light at the end of the tunnel, but I am also all about admitting reality. And sometimes we need to see real darkness. This is not good. It's real. It's reality. I may or may not have chosen to get here. But the reality of it is that I am here and it is real. In Job chapter 3, in verse 4, he says, "This day is a day of darkness. No light can even shine upon it." Verse 5, it is deep darkness that claims it. The end of verse 5, "Let the blackness of the day." Oh, there's many, many references to this idea of darkness. I come down in verse 9. "Let the stars of its dawn be dark." As Job is pouring out his heart, as he's describing to us what he's feeling, he over and over again has this idea or this image of blackness, darkness, void, emptiness. Sometimes I think it's beneficial for you and I in life. How do we survive the darkest hours of life? I think number one is we just need to admit they're dark. We need to admit that things are not like I drawed them up. That my dreams and my aspirations and my goals for this time in my life they're just unfulfilled. And therefore, maybe I need to admit some choices I made to create this darkness. Or maybe I, like Job, need to realize that I've done nothing wrong. It's just called life. But it's dark. And it's gloomy. And it isn't forever. It's a period of time. When we look back across life, we might even start calling them moments in life. We see valleys, and if we've lived long enough to be able to look back in retrospect, we say, that was just a brief moment, but it was a valley. And it was dark. And it was real. And maybe we, unlike Job, Job's in the bottom of the valley in chapter 3. But maybe we have come back up on another peak, and so now we can look back. But we do ourselves no favor emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. We do ourselves no favor ignoring reality. If it's dark, call it dark. Job did. He said, I'm living in darkness. Take away don't even let the light shine here. Let the stars be turned to darkness. But then number two, I want you to think about with me for just a moment, how do we respond to trouble? How do we respond to real darkness? Because how we respond to trouble can make all the difference in the world. The boss comes in and lays on your desk that pink slip. And your life crumbles. How are you going to respond? You call it whatever you want to call it. You can be as optimistic as you want to be, but your life has just crumbled. It is dark. And it is real right now. And how are you going to respond to that suffering? How are you going to respond to that pain? How are you going to respond to the trouble? Notice Job says in verse 4, I did not hide trouble. I did not hide. God did not hide. He's talking to God and he says, God, you did not hide trouble from my eyes. He's admitting the reality that because my mother's womb opened and I was born into life, therefore I was born into trouble, and it is just a part of living life. I am not hid from it. I am not kept from it. I am not reserved from it. He says in verse 26, but trouble comes. Trouble comes. What are we going to do in the midst of trouble? How are we going to respond? We spent those first 3 months of the year trying to get our minds around the fact that the better off we prepare for suffering. And I come back to that thought just momentarily in this lesson to remind us that suffering's coming. How are we going to respond when it comes? How are we going to conduct ourselves? How are we going to behave? How are we going to react? How are we going to treat others? Are we going to try to hide? Are we going to try to hide from ourselves? I never will forget the lesson that Kyle Butt did a few years ago. I've heard him do it on more than one occasion. It's an excellent lesson about animals. I think about that lesson often, about how we respond to life. And he said, you know, some of us are skunks. Some of us are skunks. We just spray all over everybody. Some of us aren't we? He said, some of us are porcupines. He said, when we get hurt, we stick our prickles out. And you touch us and you're going to wear it a while. He said, some of us are turtles. So we get hurt and we stick our head in our shell and we clam up. Or maybe we turtle up. How are you going to respond? What's going to be your reactions? What's that going to do in terms of how you deal with the suffering, how others around you help you deal with the suffering, and how you ultimately overcome the suffering? I got to be honest with you. When I read Job chapter 3 in the third place, you know what I see as a result of this? You know what Job wanted as a result? He saw the darkness. He said, man, the darkness is real. I mean, it is black. He even said that it is thick, verse 6. It is thick darkness. It's real. He said, I got trouble all around me. I'm going to respond to this trouble. And thus he did. Sometimes in a good way, sometimes not such a good way. But you know what he wanted as a result of all of this? He wanted to die. Don't tell me he didn't want to die. Have you read Job chapter 3 lately? How about verse 11? It's pretty clear. Why didn't I die at birth? He wanted to die. Maybe the better answer is he wanted to never be born, but it was too late for that. Verse 16. Why didn't I just come out as a stillborn child? Well, I've done a lot of funerals in my life. I've done three children's funerals. I can't tell you how many funerals I've done. I can tell you how many kids' funerals I've done. You don't forget those folks. One of the three, was a stillborn child. Those are tough. Because there are no good answers. I don't know why this child was born stillborn, but I know it ain't the first one, and if time goes on much longer, it probably won't be the last one. But you look at a set of parents and tell them that. Job says, man, I just wish I was stillborn. That the days were hid. Job wanted to die. Look at verse 21. Who longs for death, but it comes not. Verse 22. Who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave. Now, I just got to, that's pretty low. To be thankful that you have found your grave. I haven't been there. I'm not saying I won't be there, I can't be there, or I will never be there. I know better than that. I'm just telling you at this point in my life, I've never been at a point to where I said, you know what, the grave would be better than this. But I'm admitting to you the reality because I read the book of Job just like you do. And I'm admitting to you the reality is that you and I can get to a point in life where the results we want are to die. Job got there. Job got to that point. But now, before you go any further, let's stop and realize a few things. Number one, he never took his own life. What Job did was he took heart in the fact, as you read through this, I've jumped around and I've I've specifically excluded to this point this idea of, there's an idea of rest in here. What I want you to see is I want you to see his heart that desires to die. But he knew. How do we know he knew? Well, he told us he knew. Chapter 1, verse 21. The good Lord gives, and the good Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. What did he mean by that? Well, he meant all of these animals I had, they come from the Lord. He's taking them away. I'm fine with that. All these barns I had, the good Lord gave me the blessing of having them. He's taking them away. All these children, the good Lord blessed me to have them. The good Lord has taken them away. Blessed be the name. You see, God is the giver and the taker and only God. You see, Job didn't take his life. He took heart in the fact, as we realize from Job chapter 3, he took heart in the fact that there was a rest. There was a rest that could be longed for, that had been enjoyed, that was being enjoyed. And there is a rest. The authors of Hebrews remind us that there is a rest that still remains. A heavenly rest. A Sabbath day's rest. There is a rest. Job did not, please realize, Job did not seek a way of escape. Job pondered the problems that he was faced with and how to deal with them. Don't we have a lot of escapes today? You know, one of the things that I haven't mentioned to this point that causes trouble in our lives today are things called addictions. And for some people, that addiction is their escape. Job says, I'm not looking for an escape. I'm looking for a way to deal with the problems. How do you and I survive the darkest hours of life? It's not about trying to find a coping mechanism and thus creating an addiction. It's about pondering the problems and the situations at hand and figuring out how God and I can deal with them. The results that I may want are to die. I may feel that the only way out of this for me is death. Job saw something bigger. Job longed for something bigger. He recognizes in chapter 3 and verse 13 that even in death there would have been a rest. He recognizes that in verse 17 that the weary are at rest. He admits in verse 25, I'm not at ease. He admits in verse 25, I am not in quietness or peace. He admits in verse 25, I have verse 26 rather, I have no rest. He admits those three things in verse 26. But he's longing for, because he realizes that those who are weary and those who are stillborn and those who have died and those who have left this earth, they are all at rest. And I think about the passage in Revelation 14 and verse 13. We've heard at funerals over and over and over again. The Spirit says to me, "Write," John says, "Right, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord, for they rest from their labors, and their works do follow them." Revelation 14 and verse 13. Rest. Job says, I long for rest. Here's what I know. I know that when you and I get in the dark times of life, we are looking for ease. We're looking for a way out. God never promised that life would be a bed of roses, did He? God never promised that every day would be sunshine and there would be no rain. God never promised that there wouldn't be cloudy days and gloomy days and dark days. When we get into moments of trials and trouble and suffering, what we're looking for is quietness. We're looking for peace. We're looking for tranquility. We're looking for answers. We're looking for hope. When we get into moments of suffering and trials, difficulties and sorrows, we're looking for rest. We're weary. We're heavy laden. Life is difficult. It's challenging. We're longing to be at rest. Job said in Job 3 and verse 25, and I close, "For the thing I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me." Yep, it did. Why does it always happen like that? Why is it that it seems that always in life the very thing I don't want to happen happens? The very thing that I dread, the very thing that I seek to avoid, the very thing that it always seems like it slaps me in the forehead at some point. Why? It's called life, isn't it? It's called humanity. It's called sin. It's called a fallen people. It's called disappointment. It's called disobedience. It's called rebellion. It's called complaining. It's called murmuring. It's called seeking to do things my own way. It's called pride. It's called haughtiness. It's called selfishness. You call it whatever you want to call it. Bottom line is, we live in the world of all of that. And we can be perfectly capable of all of that. And thus creating a life of burdens. Creating a life of sorrow. Creating a life of trouble. Creating a life where darkness is real, where trouble needs to be responded to, and where the result we may actually want is to die. But that is not the result that God wants. God wants to provide rest. He wants to provide peace. He wants to provide that ease. He wants to provide those answers. He wants to give you the way of escape that is a good way, a godly way, a righteous way. He wants to give you a heart that can take courage, that can be encouraged, that can be strengthened. He wants to give you Jesus. He wants to give you a perfect sacrifice. He wants to give you a life free from sin. He wants to give you a home in heaven. He wants to give you hope and eternal life with Him. He wants to give it to you all. He's asking for your obedience. Will you? If you need to come, would you come right now?